Writing laws is easy, but governing is difficult. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is threatening people's right to know the truth, with an emphasis on the Broadcasting Regulatory Commission Bill. Joining us tonight on the show are Professor Rohan Samarjeva, Chairperson of Learn Asia, Attorney at Law Bhavani Fonseca, Senior Researcher, Center for Policy Alternatives, Dr. Rohan Korala, former Chairman of the EDB and Tourism, Manjula Gajanayaka, Executive Director, Institute for Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies. On to my immediate left to pose questions today on the show is Niresh, our senior journalist, joining us this evening on the show. You can also join in with the conversation. You can log on to our Facebook page, like it, subscribe it, and then you can join in the conversation. You could also send in your questions to the number 076 656 5353. The number once again, 076 656 5353. So let's get the ball rolling tonight with Professor Rohan Samarjeva, Chairperson of Learn Asia, on the topic threatening people's right to know the truth.
I'm a little surprised by the title because there seems to be a conclusion therein. I prefer to deal with these things in terms of questions rather than conclusions. I think there is an attempt, I think the reference is to a bill that has been brought, which I do not like, to regulate electronic media. I think this particular discussion draft contradicts the critical judgment that was given back in 1997 when a similar, well, in that case it was an actual bill, was gazetted and it went for constitutional review, and Chief Justice G.P.S. De Silva and Justices Ramanathan and Amarasinghe gave a decision which was quite broad, so to speak. They didn't say that particular sections were offensive and if they were removed it would be consistent with the Constitution. They basically said the whole thing is inconsistent with the Constitution. So if you want to get it through, get 2/3 majority and put it to a referendum. So I haven't seen one of those decisions in a while. I've been reading some of these things. So I got involved in this process in 1998 because when that thing crashed and burned and the minister was changed, they decided to create a select committee in Parliament to deal with this subject, because there was still the understanding that the issuance of licenses was to broadcasters was quite, let's say, informal, not organized, heterogeneous, and something needed to be done. So I was asked to serve as the compiler of the submissions that were brought before the select committee. That didn't really go anywhere in the 2 years. And then in 2003 there was another attempt to, in the context of the Sri Lanka program, to develop a draft. That also crashed. And now we are dealing with this. But just before this happened, in 2018, I was asked to chair a committee with a number of Sri Lankan experts to develop a, well, essentially a solution to the problem. And we developed a report and what could be the basis of a act, of course not in the legal draftsman's format, and we gave it to the minister. But then, 2018 things happened. Minister portfolios changed, Easter bombing happened, various things happened, and that went nowhere. So when I look at this bill, I look at it in contrast to the work that we did, which I believe drew on the best practices, drew on a model not of pure self-regulation, but of a form of co-regulation, and was introducing the concept of modern licensing, which is found in other utility sectors that I work in. In modern licenses, the license imposes obligations on both parties. So it imposes obligations on the licensor as well as the licensee, and provides significant safeguards to the licensee in terms of the procedures that have to be followed to declare that there's a violation of a term of license or anything like that. Because you see, the other part of it is, while we can say that licensing has been quite irregular, we actually have had 3 overnight license cancellations in this country. Raja FM, all 2006, 2007, Raja FM, the entire radio broadcasting network of Hiru, overnight, and the CBN SAT and LBN licenses, the satellite retransmission licenses, also being cancelled. And if you look at, I will conclude with this, if you look at how 2 of those licenses were restored, which were quite questionable means, where a person crosses over to the government party, a massive 67 million Sri Lanka rupees donation is given to the Chief Justice's favorite charity and things of that nature. You can imagine that the licenses that didn't get cancelled were somewhat tainted with various deals and understandings.
Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarjeva, Chairperson of the Learn Asia. I now move my attention towards Attorney at Law Bhavani Fonseca, Senior Researcher, Center for Policy Alternatives.
Thank you, Shamir. And I mean, the topic itself, I think, raises a lot of questions at this time, considering a lot of other issues that's happening. But I think fundamentally, we need to understand what does freedom of expression mean in Sri Lanka at this moment, but also looking at what's happened in the past. So when we talk about proposed laws, one of the things I would like to be very clear is what is the intention of the government of the day in terms of bringing something like the present document. I won't even say it's a bill because it hasn't been gazetted, and as far as we know, the government keeps saying this is a white paper or a concept note or whatever. And there are lots of, I think, gaps in this that we can go into. But in terms of the whole idea of it, and looking at just even this year, what the government has tried to do is a couple of months ago, and in this program, we had this discussion about the proposed anti-terror law. Now that again was an attempt to restrict people's rights, and freedom of media, freedom of expression was going to be one aspect. Now this has come about, and the whole question is, what is the intention? And from all of this, one realizes that there are insidious attempts by the government to control one's thought, one's expression, one's speech. And as a lawyer, I'll also say fundamental rights guarantee freedom of expression. It's a right. It's not an absolute right, but it's a right. And what we've seen through the years, through the Supreme Court, is that there are a very vigorous attempt to protect fundamental rights and freedom of expression. Now, it's also very important that in 1997, as Rohan mentioned, there was a bill that was challenged, and the Supreme Court, in a excellent determination, goes into some of these aspects. And I think it's very important when we talk about something of a proposal to understand what was done before. Have lessons not been learned? The Supreme Court is very clear. You can have licenses, but it shouldn't impede people's right to get information, to be able to express. And there's been several other judgments after that by the Supreme Court, we can go into it, in terms of protecting this very, very fragile but very important right. So this particular document, the question would be to the government is, why now? What is it that they're trying to do? Do they foresee a prospect where people are going to be critical? Media institutions are going to be critical. And is this going to be the latest tool in a whole series of attempts by the government to really say how people should think, how people should speak? So it's, as I said, very, very worrying as to that this is even a document that people are considering, especially in the terms of what it implies to people's rights. But I think this very fundamental issue of, is the government now bringing in various ways of controlling all forms of behavior, thought, speech? So I will say at the very outset, this is just something that we need to really question, critique and challenge as much as possible.
Bhavani, very quickly, many opposition parties claim that the next few months are going to be tough for Sri Lanka. It's going to be a tough period, just as we witnessed last year during the Aragalaya. Is this effort being taken to suppress the media because of such an impending situation that may arise in the country in the future?
It looks like it, Shamir. I mean, that's why I said we need to think about what has the government done in the last few months. So just this year, we had this anti-terror law that was the proposal brought about. And the reason they went back to the drawing boards is because we challenged, we critiqued in this program and outside. We really raised the question, what is the intention? Now, even last year, if one remembers, they tried to bring in a rehabilitation authority. It's now law, but in this program, but outside, we challenged it and said, why do you need such a broad-based law? Now, these are all, I think, part of a series. It's not an accident. These are not happening in a vacuum. So that's why I said, what is the intention? And the intention seems to be really to curtail people's ability to dissent, and that dissent will be met with real serious consequences. And that's hopefully something we can unpack today.
Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Bhavani Fonseca, Senior Researcher, Center for Policy Alternatives. I now move my attention towards Dr. Rohan Tatukorala, former chairman of EDB and Tourism. What are your thoughts, Rohan?
Thank you very much, Shamir. Just to give a context, my background is from British multinationals for about 20 years, and then I also worked for the UN for about 5 years. So, you know, when something is brought about in terms of policy and in terms of practice into an industry, we always look at the pros and the cons, and we look at the depth of it. And from that light, I see the good and the bad coming out. If I mention the good, is that strictly if you look at the white paper that has been brought about, in objectives E, it says determine the number of licenses that could be obtained by a person or a broadcasting entity for the purpose of providing broadcasting services. So if I look at that one, I think there is some logic to that objective. Why? Because we have 18 TV stations, we have radio 44 stations, and we have newspapers about 15. And for a small market which is about 21 million people, to have so much of media is actually over share of voice. In 2022, we have spent about 161 billion Sri Lankan rupees in terms of advertising spend. So, you know, how you're going to consolidate this, how it's going to be easy for businesses in terms of advertising, creating that kind of awareness level and the top of the mind. There's some logic that could happen, and it might simplify business. So I'm talking about the good of what I see from this white paper. What I see the negatives is that, just like what was discussed, it's a timing. Is this what the country actually requires? Our economy, which was 83 billion, has shrunk to about 70 billion. We have gone from 7.8% drop to about 3% GDP growth this time. Our total brand value has dropped from about 84 billion to about 70 billion dollars. So what global thinking comes out when it in terms of building your brand value is that the people must share their voice. The truth needs to be told so that people around the world believe, and that's exactly what is going to help you to rebuild the credibility of the nation. And once you rebuild, what happens is it helps in your exports, it helps you to attract top quality tourists and foreign direct investments. So this particular bill, if it's going to curtail that truth to be told, then the question is, it's against the spirit of the macro challenge that the country needs to do. So that's my view of this bill.
Rhonda, you spoke about the timing of the bill, and this is not the right time. I want to take your memory a few weeks back when the IMF regulations came into play, where they very clearly point out that an anti-corruption bill needs to be brought in to ensure that the country is on the right track. When such an urgent requirement is the need of the hour, why is the government, in your opinion, trying to focus on something of this sort?
That's actually the key issue that we need to discuss today, Shamir. Because see, if the law is being implemented and you would find who is right and who is wrong, the media reports exactly what was done. But if the law is going to protect people who are corrupt, then question is, if the media brings this out to the surface, is it wrong? For example, if you take the fertilizer scandal that happened, I mean, fertilizer was bought from China, $6.9 million. Then it was sent back because it didn't meet the certain quality standards. So far, we have not got the money, we have not got the fertilizer.
No,
now,
we paid the 6.9 million.
Yeah, so
But
we have
didn't
not
get the
got
fertilizer.
We didn't get the fertilizer, we didn't get the return money back. So now the question is, if the media brings this out, is it wrong? It's a truth well told. If the media didn't bring this out, none of us would have not even known that there was this scandal. So if the law was used to find who are the people who were the perpetrators, and if it was implemented, then there is nothing called a bill that is required because it's the truth being told. So I think, like you very rightly said, Shamir, I mean, for the first time in IMF stipulations, under Section 5, it says the anti-corruption bill needs to be brought in, you know, and why have they done that? Because they believe that the truth is not being held. And if you cannot blame the media for reporting what was not done in justice. So your point is very valid, you know. We should correct what is right and wrong, not just go after the media who reports the truth.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rohan Datukaral, former chairman of the EDB and tourism. I think the thinking of the IMF is Sri Lanka is a corrupt nation, and that is why these laws are required if we are to be put on the right track. I now move my attention towards Manjula Kajanayaka, Executive Director of the Institute for Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies.
Thanks, Ramir. Thanks for inviting and having me in this conversation. So when it comes to media regulations, actually, when it comes to this draft, I would like to ask two specific questions. The first one is actually, don't we have sufficient laws to tackle media industry? The second one is actually, are we utilizing existing laws in an effective ways? Okay, then if we can find answers for these two questions, actually we can sort out what is in this specific draft. Bhavani correctly mentioned actually, this is something actually, yes, it is not a bill, even it is a draft. My understanding is actually that this is a very vague draft as well as copy paste. Actually, it is something copy paste. Okay? I can prove in later because
but whoever has copied it, Manjula, has forgot to look at the spellings of this
yes,
draft
no,
question. No,
yes, this is a serious document. No, that
there are at least 10 spelling mistakes.
Indeed, definitely.
Wondering who wrote this actually.
Okay.
Whoever copied it has done a good job.
Yeah, the other thing is actually then, actually since I'm an election observer and researcher actually representing citizens, my first concern is that actually, yes, this is a draft. I saw that some of media team actually, they have requested specifically that they need the translation of this draft actually Sinhala and Tamil. The thing is actually, yes, there's an English draft actually. When it comes to the translation process, we don't know what they are going to present. I mean, we know that there are many controversial laws as well as draft there are. Then when it comes to regulations actually, let me to quote Winston Churchill. So Winston Churchill actually, once he said, if you make 10,000 regulations, you destroy all respect for the law. Okay, he said like that. Then in current situation, what I see that actually the professor earlier mentioned regarding the bill, they came up at the 1997. When it comes to that bill presented 1997, actually, that the panel of commission, I mean the members of commission, when look at the names, the designation of those commission members, actually it is just like mini cabinet, okay, of the government. I mean, they have appointed, they are going to appoint secretaries to media, education, post, defense. That is the context, that is the structure of that particular commission. Okay, after that, when it comes to this particular draft, let me to say, this is just like a branch of President's office. Who are they appointing? Appointing authority. Okay, they are going to appoint the 2 persons from the officially, as well as President will appoint other 3 persons. When it comparing with 20th amendment to the Constitution, actually, I would like to compare that the same sentiment echoing what 20th amendment has in the when regarding the appointing authority. Actually, that means we always suffer. I mean, as a nation, we have suffered enough through the executive presidency. Now it seems that through this bill also, actually, it is more strengthening the executive presidency through this bill. That is one of my serious concern. And other thing is, actually, yes, though we are living in a digital era, actually, still according to the SLPI research I recently referred, still 64.8 people are consuming, actually interested to having news through the television, not social media, even now. Then this is a big industry, as Dr. Atukorala said. Okay, then actually you can't control this just imposing regulations. There should be a different culture to regulate this. Then we can talk about later on. But this is, I think, my conclusion is actually this is a very vague document, and also this is something actually not required at this very right moment.
Thank you very much, Manjula Gajanaka, Executive Director of the Institute for Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies. Niresh, shall we get the ball rolling today?
Yes.
Because you're the only one who's flanked onto my left today.
That's right. So, Shamir, Manjula referred to how vague this so-called white paper or draft bill is. And, you know, I've been a journalist for 34 years, and I've read this from cover to cover about 5 times. And if this bill is passed, there is nothing that we can report on the news. Absolutely nothing. Let me give you an example. Section 3 talks about any matter that may lead to a threat to the national economy. Now, that is so broad, that is so vast. So, if the stock market crashes tomorrow, can we report it? Not according to this, because we would be threatening the national economy further by disseminating that information. So, we can't report that. Okay?
Yeah. However, we shouldn't forget actually this headed by the Minister of Justice, and there's a cabinet subcommittee to draft this, no?
So, no, but what is appalling, Niresh, is the fact that parliamentarians, head of states, go to parliament and then say that they will shut down the country's stock market, and then they go scot-free, and the stock market, the results that came out in the next few days were very, very bad. So in a situation like that, how broad are these words: national security, national economy, and public order?
And this leads to, Shamir, the fact that how is the public going to get this information? They would have to rely solely on social media, which is, it's chaos. Social media, anyone can get on social media and write under any pseudonym and just pass off misinformation. We as broadcasters, on the other hand, we are responsible. We are in a particular location, we are registered, our journalists are registered, and we operate within the law. So now the direct result, if this bill becomes law, would be a stifling of the free flow of information, because how are we to broadcasters to risk our licenses, to risk journalists being hauled up to the CID and so on, just by reporting on the stock market? So what do you think, Manjula, of that?
Two things actually. Before answering that question, actually I forgot to mention the specific things. That means we are heading to time actually no elections, okay? Then there are 2 elections already postponed, provincial council and local government. Then it seems that government is going to have a national election. We don't know that their intention has changed. Anyway, actually the previously what we understood that they are going to have a national elections. Okay, then if they are going to have such election stopping other elections, actually they need to shut the mouth of watchdogs. That is the one thing actually they can use as a tool to stop it. Actually, if you can read this draft very carefully, actually they can, I mean the normal natural justice is that you can stop, you can shut any, not media institution, anything actually after fair trial, no? But actually while the investigation going on, they have a power. I mean the investigation commission, finally the commission has a power to stop it. My answer is actually, my take on that is that when it comes to an election time, it is very easy to do something. I mean, not even close down the media organization. I mean, at least they can threat. Finally, the basic intention of introducing this bill is actually that convert private media as state media, what they are right now.
So, Bhavan, if you look at it, don't you think that the government is trying to send a strong signal to the media? If you do not act based on the whim and fancy of the government in power, we will cancel your license. Isn't that what this means?
Looks like it. I mean, and I mean, this is the thing, Shamir. When I read this, I actually wondered, is this actually a document coming from the government? Because apart from what Niresh said about the spelling issues, all of that, just the direction this is going, they're not even hiding the fact they're trying to control any form of alternative viewpoints. There's nothing here. I mean, it's extremely, the terminology is so vague and so broad. Who is to decide what national security is? Who is to decide what national economy is? Who is to decide public order? Now, we can always look at our recent history in Sri Lanka. I mean, last year what happened with the crisis, we had thousands of people coming to the streets. Now, if something like this happens and a broadcaster shows images of people getting to the streets peacefully protesting, can the Commission decide that that's a threat to public order, that it's a threat to national security? That's one. Now, we had the lockdown. There were questions raised, including by some of us, about the legality of some of the measures taken at this point. There were people who were arrested for raising questions at that time. Now, in a situation such as that, when people also worry, there's uncertainty, if a broadcaster raises questions about the legality of certain measures, would that come under a threat to public order, national security? So just looking at the recent events, just a critique of what the government of the day is trying to do could raise issues where the Commission puts an interim directive or cancels a license. I mean, such broad base. Now, there is one, I mean, I think one of the things we need to look at is what is the form of the Commission. That raises questions. Who appoints? What is the role of the Constitution Council? All of that. And while there's seemingly a role for the Constitution Council, if you really look at it, it's the executive who appoints, even though it says approval of the Constitution Council. But the executive can also remove by informing the Constitution Council. That's also very problematic. Now, that's the process of appointment. But the vague terminology, who decides what these terms are? You know, who is going to drive those decisions?
Bhavan, if you look at it, the Secretary of the Ministry of the Minister is an ex officio member in the commission in question. Who appoints the Secretary of the particular ministry? It's the President.
Exactly.
The Director General of the Telecommunications Regulatory Authority is been appointed by the President. So number two is also
by the Minister.
By the Minister.
At
but
this point,
absolutely,
it's the President.
So
but
the President.
It may be somebody.
It may be, yeah, but at the end of the day, invariably becomes the President who appoints. So all 5 members are invariably appointed by the President. And how independent is the Commission if that is the case?
That's a valid question. And I think the other thing is, it says the quorum of the Commission is 3. So say, I mean, let's assume there are some independent appointees. If 2 don't turn up and it's only 3, and those are the 3 that the President had a direct role in appointing, I mean, is that then decisions made at that time? Is it going to be an independent process and questions? And the implications of those decisions, the consequences of those decisions are so broad-based and can really shut down dissent. And this is why I keep coming back, not to kind of be the lawyer, but, you know, we have had decades of jurisprudence from our own Supreme Court that protects fundamental rights, the freedom of expression, that says that dissent is not just something we take for granted, that dissent is not just something that is there to survive. It needs to be encouraged. There needs to be a space for dissent in Sri Lanka. What we see, not just with this, but a whole series of measures by this government, shows that dissent is going to be, there is no space for dissent. So this is, I mean, this is just the most latest tool in a whole series of tools.
Bhavan, you speak about the appointment of the members of commission, but even the removal
that's what I mentioned,
is also
by the
President. If you look at it, if you look at what happened in the last few weeks, the removal of Janaka Ratnayaka as the Public Utilities Commission chairman, it really raised an eyebrow in every quarter of society, because people were of the opinion that he was doing his job, and he was removed through a public a vote in Parliament. And this shows that the government or the President in power can just remove him at his discretion. So
by informing the Constitution Council.
By informing the Constitution Council.
But could I add to address your question directly? I think that the general objects of an act are, I mean, they are important, powerful, etc. But what you should be really looking at are the terms of the licenses, which are yet to be drafted. Because it's under the terms of the licenses that a license will be cancelled, suspended, actions will be taken. There is also another worrisome subject, which is regulations. So those regulations that I mentioned here could include, they use terms like codes of ethics. They use, it's almost like a translation problem. Code of ethics, code of something, code of something. They use 3 terms for the same thing, more or less. That would be the more powerful one, in my opinion, because that would have to be in place. Now, one of the things that we were trying to avoid in our committee was to give the minister the authority to make regulations regarding content. What we said is the content, the codes of practice must be arrived at through public hearings with the participation both of the broadcasters or whoever was concerned in that particular class, and the members of the general public, and approved by the commission, and then included as a license term. So that's a form of co-regulation, if you look at the technical term. So it's not just self-regulation, which has failed in Sri Lanka, but self-regulation backed up by the fact that it's part of a license. But how that came about is through a process that did not involve the minister or politicians in any form. So that's sort of one distinction we had to make. And the other thing is that the interpretation of that and the taking of action, etc., would require an independent commission. Now, I'm agreed with Bhavani that there is no independent commission. And I would like to add one more thing, which is that I have been involved in enforcing licenses. And I've also been on a commission where the chairman was ex officio the secretary of the ministry. Now, when you have a secretary as ex officio chairman, there are two problems. That is, whenever the secretary is changed, a new person comes in. There's no appointment, new human being comes because it's ex officio. And secondly, the secretary of the ministry is the chief accounting officer of all the entities that are under it. That means that it's an extremely powerful position. So even though this discussion draft talks about a chairman being appointed, I don't think a chairman could be there overriding the secretary. The secretary will be the de facto chairman. So I think those are the two things that we need to look at, because if you look at regulations, even if the commission, this not independent commission, were to come up with codes of practice or codes of ethics or whatever they call it, and wants to put them into regulations, they'll have to go through the minister. And the minute you have to go through the minister can say, I don't like that sentence. I'd like that worded differently. So it's essentially becomes the minister's instrument, because I've done these things. I've sent regulations through. So then it becomes the minister's instrument. And if you look at the Athukorola decision, these are specifically the things that are referred to as being inappropriate for media in a democratic society. Right. So that is what we have to look at. So I don't think this can be remedied or retrieved, but we have to understand the basic architecture, which is problematic.
So Professor Samarashiva, you write an article on the 5th of June titled "What Media Regulation is Not."
Yeah.
And then in your conclusion you say, a return to the drawing board appears the only appropriate course of action with regard to this bill in question. So do you mean to say that certain provisions of the bill should be intact, but certain provisions
return to the drawing board means
complete,
take it away, start again. I have actually over that week I have come to sort of revise or fine-tune my opinion, which is that I understand that some references have been made to our report in various presentations and conversations. So now my suggestion, which I did publish in my Sinhala articles over the weekend, was, why don't you put this? This is, somebody said Sinhala and translations are not available. This is available in Sinhala, Tamil and English. It's a report which justifies it. It has footnotes, the whole works. It has even references to Milton's Aryopagatika. And it has got sections, it has got things people can discuss, definitions. This one, for example, the interpretation section defines the minister. I mean, do you really need to define a minister? And nothing else. So this has got all these definitions. It, for example, even distinguishes between conventional broadcasting and retransmission, because that retransmission is a different beast altogether, a cable and satellite retransmission. So it says that's a different class.
Right. Professor Samarashiva, I want to drag your attention to what happened during the last couple of days. You, alongside with two others, went to the CID recently over an issue that cropped up with regard to how media ethics revolve around as far as broadcast journalism is concerned. And then there was reference made to two private media institutions by one of your colleagues who were accompanying you at that instance. Can you bring in a regulation just because two people out of 18 broadcasters or 44 broadcasters, as Rohantha spoke about, just to penalize two people who are not in line, who are either crooked or either not doing their job based on the social norms of a country, to penalize the rest of the media fraternity?
I don't think that there's any attempt or intention or anything to say that just because one person violates, you should penalize everybody. I think that's a real stretch to argue that. But I think it does demonstrate that we are living in a country where religious and ethnic hatred and disaffection can be fostered by the actions of media, not only the mainstream media, but in that case also some of the YouTube channels. Now, back in, perhaps people didn't pay enough attention to it, I was speaking at a press conference where I said, you know, things are pretty sensitive and pretty dangerous situation we are in. Things seem to be stoked up and fired up. Therefore, why doesn't everybody cool down and step back and be cautious about what's going on? Because that was a judgment from a very senior politician with a lot of experience. That was his judgment, and I agreed with it. Now, my younger colleagues don't have that level of patience, and my younger colleagues said, you know, look at all this bad stuff that's being done. We should. They didn't refer to a particular act. They didn't ask the CID to come up with a law or anything like that. They just said, this is bad, do something about it, right? If you're doing things about Natasha Edrisuriya, why don't you also do something about the people who are taking what she said, excerpting it, framing it, and using it in the month of May when she spoke in the month of April. So I think that's a separate argument, not quite connected to this. But I think it does illustrate the fact. So if you look at what happened to Dr. Shafi, we have to admit, I mean, again, I would say in that case, we would have to admit that the print media, which is not part of this conversation, will have to be also held accountable, that here you have a professional, a human being, a family, and it basically destroyed by media action. I mean, there were human beings whose voices were amplified, but quite a lot of it was plain and pure media action. So I think I would use both these cases to argue that it's a justification for media regulation. It has to be there in this country. It has to be there. Article 15 of the Constitution says that we shouldn't have freedom of speech that causes people to be, you know, ethnic, religious hatred, etc. That, I think, is necessary.
Rohantha, the bill speaks about renewing licenses of an organization, a media organization, in a period of 12 months, in a year. How prudent is this decision? Because, you know, opening up a company is a tall task. It's not easy. There's a lot of money that is being put in. There's a lot of capital expenditure that comes into play with the current rate of interest that we're talking about in Sri Lanka. Hitting the two-digit number at the moment, it's not easy. Even to recuperate your return on investment on a particular capital expenditure would take you at least 15 to 20 years, given the current context as far as interest rates are concerned. So how prudent is it to be renewing licenses for a year? Will the banks lend money if the licenses are to be renewed every year? What about the people who are working in these organizations, like the journalists? What about their future? How do you view this?
If I may add to that, Shamir, media institutions in any medium, be it print or electronic, don't make a lot of money, and it takes many years to become profitable. So what a bill such as this would do is to dissuade investors from investing in media at all, because it's very costly. when you talk about transmitters, camera equipment, and all the other paraphernalia, training of journalists, it's very manpower intensive. So why would a businessman invest in it at all if he stands to get his license cancelled
Within a year.
within a year?
See, that's exactly the point that I'm also arguing, Shamir. For instance, you know, when a country is driving towards, you know, bouncing back, you know, you would look at models around the world, how companies and how countries developed. And we don't see this kind of strategies being implemented by those countries. For example, if you take Croatia, came out of a war between 1990 and 1995, and it was a bitter war, just like Sri Lanka. And then, you know, the leadership said, let's go and connect with the world. They opened 197 embassies around the world. You know, they came out with a Croatian product logo for every single product. They got people to come and invest on communication, media, talk about the goodness of the country. If there's anything bad, let's highlight it. So that then what happens is entrepreneurship starts building at a discussion level. And new thinking came in. And today, if you take a brand like Croatia, you know, it's one of the top countries in Europe. Their exports have almost gone up to about 20 billion. Their tourism has gone up to about 6 billion euro. How? Because the brand was built. Now, when you come out with a strategy like this, you are trying to stifle people's discussion. You have a situation where the private sector already is mum when it comes to discussion of policy. If you take the chambers, they would never come around a table and discuss. Okay? When you put in a clause like this, they shut. So what happens is, the point you mentioned, Shamir, where you would like to invest on new digital technologies, and then you're going to make new TV commercials. You don't only just do broadcasting, and you're going to build brands, build enterprises. All that comes from a media station. Now, if you don't do that and allow that to happen, and you're saying that every 12 months I'm going to come and re-evaluate your licenses, you start playing cautious. How do you cut through the clutter when you have so much of competition? At least if the competition was reduced and said, okay, I'm going to have only two media stations, then you would give some degree of size of market to say I'm investing, and I know that I need to be careful in what I say. But here, when you have 18 TV stations, each station wants to be up against a competitor brand, you have to take that leap. Otherwise, you're not going to get the eyeballs to watch it. So and then if you make one mistake, you're gone. So it's the whole spirit of.
What about the future of journalists, Rohan? Now, we all speak about attracting FDIs is very important and imperative for Sri Lanka, which has a dire economic condition even now. When foreigners see Sri Lanka bring in regulations of this sort, do you think Sri Lanka would be an attractive hub?
See, what's going to happen is that the freedom of speech is not there. And end of the day, Simon Arnold, the guy who talks about building a brand using journalists, bloggers, and the news media, they always say that the best form of advertising is the people and what people say. They don't talk about beautiful advertising by tourism and exports going all over with this flimsy advertising. Doesn't build brands. It's what the voice of the people, what it says. Now, if the voice of the people and the private sector is not being allowed to talk freely, good and bad, just like what happens on maybe NDTV or in India, where everybody is allowed to say, you stifle economic activity. So my point
when you look at Indian media, they're highly critical.
Absolutely.
But don't you think there's quite a lot of repression going on in the Indian media as well?
Yes,
and
but
that the private media have been tamed in the last few years?
But
is it that
Professor,
we see the grass being greener on the other side?
No, Professor, what I see is by sheer numbers, it's difficult for one party to try to control.
I think we should talk to some of the Kashmiri journalists and media.
Well, yes, there are certain, Kashmir is a whole different ball game. but it's difficult to control when you have thousands of journalists, hundreds of media institutions, especially localized ones. And there is a better chance for a free flow of information. So it's not just about freedom of expression, it is free flow of information to the audience, which now we were talking about businesses, chambers, companies. How are they going to get a free flow of information if the information is stifled?
But if you look at the situation now, I mean, I know this is terrible, right? What's being proposed is awful. But if you look at the situation now, I mean, when an investor would look at the media environment today, where licenses have been arbitrarily overnight cancelled in number of cases, and then there were no proper inquiries, no proper hearings, nothing. And you can also see that, you know, some licenses don't have terms, some have arbitrary terms, and so on. It seems quite chaotic. So I have a feeling that, you know, what we now have is a kind of a deal-based arrangement, not a proper licensing arrangement at the present time, which is, I would say, somewhat problematic for investment as well.
Rohan, I think your point is valid. That's what I said. You know, when you have 18 TV stations attacking 21 million people, you know, how do you target? How do you create a niche? So there is some degree of regulations that are required to actually uplift the industry. You know, I agree with what Rohan is, the point she is making. But then, you know, what happens is, if you're this particular act is about, not about development, it's about saying, be cautious of what you say. You know, and if the truth is being told and it's not in right, you have a chance of your license getting annulled. Now that is what the danger is.
It's completely a stick approach the government is trying to do. So, Manjula, getting back into what you said, you say that a national election is what the government is proposing at this point of time. 2 elections have been postponed, the provincial council election and local government elections. So do you think that a piece of paper like this is the way out for any government? Wouldn't this impact their popularity moving towards an election that probably would take place next year or a few months from now?
Just to add one thing there for Manjula to perhaps discuss is, isn't it rather ridiculous that we are talking about something as serious as the drafting of laws being dependent on somebody's election, which may or may not happen, and the pros and cons of various parties winning or losing. I mean, that's absolutely, absolutely the most horrendous approach to making of law. I mean, Professor Rohan articulated how the process from 1997, you know, the various committees and so on that you sat on, and you know, that it's a lawmaking is a process, whereas here, you know, okay, we'll have an election, so let's bring in this law. Let's not have an election, so, you know, let's not change the law.
And the other point is, I don't know how these draft bills are popping out. You know, a few weeks ago we speak about an anti-terrorism bill, and days after, Niresh,
back to back,
you have this.
But at least in those cases, you see, we had a counter-terrorism bill in 2018 or thereabouts.
Yeah,
you know, there are significant and problematic deviations from that. But there was something that had been done. In the case of the anti-corruption bill, there was a document. And I want to point out that it has actually gone through Constitutional Council Constitutional Court review, and it has just to be put on the order paper. So it's not like it's not coming, it's on the way. Here, while our report existed, they decided to just disregard it completely and write their own thing. I thought you were going to say it had been cut and paste from here. I can tell you, it's not cut and paste from here.
That's a good one.
If it was cut and paste from here, those definitions, etc.,
the article would be different.
Would be.
Shamir, I would argue if we can have the same passion towards economic development, free trade agreement with China, you have a ferry that's operating, the air transfer is happening, now you have a cruise line, free trade is from 0.5 billion, it had gone to 0.8 billion for the last 10 years, right? If the middle income in India is 500 million, right? And they are saying, we want Sri Lankan products. Get the policies of that on the table, go there, discuss how we can make this 2 billion. I wish that passion was there. But the question is not about, I mean, in 1991, India had the same problem, no? Economic collapse. So the whole strategy was on the economy. But that passion doesn't exist in trade and commerce.
So perhaps what we should blame is the Minister of Trade, who seems to be not working, while the Minister of Justice is churning it out.
Or maybe the leadership
Maybe the
is...
guy is sort of hyperactive and he's just churning them out.
Or
Pretty
Rohan,
much everything that's coming from him.
or Rohan,
He's
there
giving
are
the
certain-
leadership speech.
Or Rohan, the leadership has certain pet areas.
Dinesh, what you ask actually, that my concern is that my answer is that right now, actually, government is not concerned on people's consent as well as, they are not thinking on people's right now. That's the thing. If so, actually, they are not going to sell telecom in a one package with the Sri Lankan airline. No, I know that Professor is writing more and more regarding that. But if they are concerning on people's aspirations, actually, they will not going to sell in telecom and Sri Lankan airline actually in the same package. That's the thing. Regarding your specific questions, actually, my understanding is that government is not concerning on what you mentioned. Actually, they are concerning only how to win the elections. Then, what they understood actually, media institutions and other entities are obstructing, maybe obstructing to their course. That's the thing. Otherwise, actually, if they have a real, genuine effort, willingness to do this, there are 4 or 5 acts already existing. Telecommunication Act 1991, 1996.
But I would say that Shafi's case illustrates the point, or even Natasha's case illustrates the point. The existing laws are inadequate. They are quite unsatisfactory and do not give any remedies. The self-regulatory system for print media has failed. So I think the answer to your first question, you said, do we have the current laws? Are they adequate? My answer is unequivocal no.
Dinesh, correct me if I'm wrong. The National Press Complaints Commission, is the regulations are for the print media journalists, isn't it?
Right.
It's self-regulated.
The Press Complaints Commission, Sri
Press
Lanka.
Complaints Commission.
Self-regulated.
Yes.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
I mean, what can I tell you? Has anybody taken action against Angaharuloven Gadol? The absolute falsehoods that are propagated by the Divine newspaper? The attacks on Shafi and the destruction of that family? Has anybody done anything? Has regulation worked?
So talk about this bill in question, Manjula. Now, the objectives of this bill, if you look at preamble H, it says, issuing guidelines in respect of broadcasting to enhance the spiritual development and mental health of the people while safeguarding the social and cultural values and entertainment of the people. Can you give me some clarity on this, Bhavani or Manjula, for that?
Yeah, that is
when
something.
you say spiritual development, what do they envisage to achieve?
I mean, you're asking us. Because when I read this, I also did wonder.
Yeah.
I think we all agree this is a very badly drafted piece of paper. I don't want to even say bill because I don't think this. We have that
qualifies to become
exactly.
bill. Yeah.
But the approach to it, all of that. But the point that was made about lawmaking, I think that's a very important question in Sri Lanka because and not just this government, over the years, over the decades, I think that's a very problematic thing in terms of who drafts these bills, who decides on it, what's the purpose of these things. Now, with this and even with the anti-terror bill, just these two raises questions of who is really behind this process, who is sitting and drafting it. Now, publicly they say the Minister of Justice is part and parcel and doing it, but really does he have the time to sit and draft this? And if he is the one who's drafting it, really they should review as to whether these kind of things should be given to a Minister of Justice. But
were the Minister of Justice competent to draft bills?
a good
at
question,
all?
good question. But these two that I mentioned, at least that we've looked at, came from that. I mean, his name is associated. So I think there needs to be really questions as to why that kind of process is happening. But really, all these bills are affecting people's rights, the citizen. Now, where does the citizen come into any of these processes? With the anti-terror law, they withdraw, or at least they're saying they're having consultations after they gazette it. Now with this, because there's a bit of noise, they're saying this is not a bill, they're going to have
a white
conversation.
paper.
It's a white paper, whatever it is. But why do you not start with that? The consultations, looking at drafts, I mean, there are things that have been done before. So it seems like even though some of it goes to the Supreme Court, all of that, that's all forgotten. But I also want to make the point that Sri Lanka has a plethora of laws on so many things. Now, because certain cases have been raised, the two arrests recently under the ICCPR, a comedian and a blogger, and Dr. Shafi's case and so many others. What has been used to target these particular individuals? What is the purpose of those cases? Now, one thing that comes out of all these cases is the ICCPR Act. The ICCPR Act has been used on the basis of religious racial harmony and creating particular issues, as the state would say, in terms of upsetting sensitivities. Now, then the question is, there is evidence of particular individuals inciting violence against communities, minorities. Has action been taken against them? Rohan raised the whole point of particular media institutions behind Dr. Shafi's case, but others as well. Has any action been taken? So,
But don't you think the existing laws in Sri Lanka allows you to take action against such institutions?
If they want to take action, the law is there. So
Has
it's
any
about
action been taken against the media institution?
It's
No.
about implementation.
Just individuals.
And
Look at
it's
the media
about
institutions.
selective.
Is there any action taken against corruption? So,
Just individuals. Shaktika Satkumara, Ramzi Rasikh, just innocent individuals who are incapable of defending themselves. The big boys have not been taken down. That was why we said, hey,
It is basically the
people
problem of proper implementation of law, no?
and Shamir, we must do something that's going to benefit the country, and the brand for people to come and say, here's a country which is bankrupt, but I'm here going to come and engage.
But Ron, my question is, Niresh, my question is, we are a country that now needs to talk about the Express Pearl matter, which can bring in $6 billion plus US dollars to the country. What are we talking about? We're talking about a comedian, we're talking about a blogger, we're talking about a bill or a white paper, whatever you may call it, or a set of half sheets. We're talking about all this. This is not what we should be talking about. We should be talking about progressive things. How to revive the country's economy. How are we going to move out of this situation of our dire economic conditions right now? What is happening with the US dollar? Are those the real problems that we need to be talking about,
I think
Rohan?
I would disagree with you. I think a situation like now, where various individuals, Balangoda Kassapahimi and various other people, have been able to mobilize the power of the state, and their actions have been amplified by certain segments of the media, have the potential to completely derail any kind of economic activity reforms that we are going to take place. They have the ability. I think we don't have to talk about much. 1983, when we had an investors conference in the BMICH and Chandi Chanmugam was speaking to them, somebody was setting fire to his house. 1983 July, right? That was one of our most esteemed senior government officials. And that derailed that entire economic growth strategy that was there at that point. So I personally believe that this is not a misplaced priority. I think we need to have ways of dealing with not this solution, but I believe we need to have it.
But
and I'm not. I think I mean, how long can we postpone this?
But
We have been postponing it for now 40 years.
yes, but shouldn't the first step be to use the existing laws against the person who burnt the house rather than the media which publicized it?
It's the should be the message at the end of the day.
Well, it all depends, because I go back to Natasha's case, where she made whatever statement she made. I listened to it. I don't think there's a iota of a problem with it. That was in April. The whole thing blows up because certain media institutions decide to blow it up. So you could say that the actor responsible for creating this conflagration is not her, it's the people who decided to blow it up. So I disagree. I think that we have to have a decent, civilized media environment in order to get the country back on the right track. I don't think it's simply a case of just focusing on trade agreements and various other things. Because the minute you start doing these things, there'll be somebody saying, this, that, whatever, and it will be another conflagration. Yeah, there will be a problem. You should have responsible media behavior at all times, not only now, but I think this is long overdue. It should have been done in 1997, 98. It would have been much easier to handle the
Professor, when you
conflict.
speak about anti-nationalistic rhetoric, we probably could buy your argument saying there needs to be some sort of regulation. But when it comes to an issue with regard to national economy, that needs two sides of the coin to express views and debate, to argue, and to find out ways, the best fit for the country, then,
as I said, I would disagree. I think I've been
it's important.
at the end of on various sides of very nasty economic debates, and the GMOA, for example, has said publicly on a TV station that I should be put in jail for my views. Right? He should be put in jail for his views. So I obviously like the give and take of debate. And I think it should be encouraged. That's the only way we'll get anywhere. But not at the cost of setting fire to the country. I don't think I've been engaged in that. I've been engaged in economic debate.
This is the GMOA who are experts in fertilizer, of course.
Well, this was before they became experts in fertilizer. They wanted me to be put in jail.
We're certainly glad that you were not.
No, Rohan, what is your take? Bhavani, now, you represent a civil rights movement, and you all champion freedom of expression, democracy, freedom of speech, and all that and more. Do you agree with the analogy of or the ideas of Professor Samarjeeva?
Meaning which ones?
In terms of having regulations in place with regard to regulate the media in the country?
I think regulations are important. I mean, I'll be surprised if someone says there shouldn't be any regulation, considering the fact what we've seen in the past in terms of the noise that's generated, but also the consequences of that noise. But how do you regulate? Who regulates? So in a way, you need an independent, and emphasis on independent mechanism to do it. I don't think that mechanism is provided in this document. That's a starting point. Then how do you come to those regulations, all of that? What's the process? It shouldn't be a kind of one-sided process. How do you engage with the different stakeholders, but also give confidence to the different actors that this is a process that's not going to be targeting institutions or individuals for reporting, for sharing the information. All of that is important. But if there is any semblance that that regulation power is to be used for political gain, to target individuals for having a different perspective, then it's extremely problematic. That's when the weaponizing starts. And in Sri Lanka, and I think the history speaks for itself, how media institutions individuals have been targeted. So any proposal that comes about needs to factor those things in. What we're talking about seems to be in some other world. And it's such a kind of Orwellian concept that this is to control. This is not to have a debate or a discussion and disagreement. This is to say this is what's going to be the case in terms of national security, national economy, public order. And if anything doesn't meet our standards, you're going to get shut down. Regulations is not that. Regulations is to say you have to be responsible in the way it's done. But you can have a different way of doing it. You can have a different opinion in doing it. That debate is extremely important in a democracy. This kind of tool, and not just this, the things we've seen in the recent couple of months is not leading to a functioning democracy. It's authoritarianism.
Shamir, yeah, just added what Bhavani correctly mentioned actually. Yes, regulation is somewhat we need. That's why media regulations has prepared by Election Commission during election times actually. It is true. Because actually today is the special day. I think that I referred the cabinet memorandum today that they have mentioned that they are going to table the media regulations during election times in future, maybe near future. That's why actually they have prepared election media guidelines during election times. It is true. But the question is that not only media channel, let's say one example that Professor took many examples, but let me to say one thing. Now, Media Director General of Media, the Media Ministry, okay? Now, he is a previous journalist who served for the president during his campaign period times, during election times. He publicly said that what Election Commission did during election time is totally incorrect. Actually, they have violated election law, 1991 parliamentary election law. Who said? Said by the Media Director General, okay, appointed by the President recently during election times, local government elections time, nomination time.
But this is the President's Media Division Director General, right?
Yes. No, Director General Media, no, the Department of Media. Okay. Then
Department of Information.
Yeah, information. Director General of
Government
Mr. Dinesh Karunaratne. Yes. Okay, he did it. Okay, if we are talking on these things, actually we have to mention this also, but no one has concern. And finally, what happened? Actually, President mentioned, he quote that what he mentioned in the during the parliamentary session. That is what happened earlier. Then that something, that kind of things can be happen, but that's why we are talking on media regulation during election times. It is a basic critical part. But the failure of this specific document, actually they have not mentioned anything regarding that also. If they had a genuine idea, actually they can mention on election that media guideline also. That another one point, 5C, article number 5C of the Right to Information Act, they have mentioned comprehensively the disclosure of such information would cause serious prejudice to the economy of Sri Lanka by disclosing prematurely decisions to change or continue government economic or financial policies relating to. And they have mentioned exchange rates, the regulation of banking or credit, taxation, the stability control, many things. Okay, okay. They have mentioned many things in the Right to Information Act. They have taken only the part economy. Okay, the word only the economy. But in this act, actually they have elaborated what kind of violation related to the economy. The thing is, that's why I repeatedly said that the vagueness of this document actually, when you are mentioning economy, what the regulation actually, you can do anything. That's the problematic area.
Well, the problem I think we've seen over the last several months, Shamir, is that these willy-nilly drafts are being put out without any process. And Manjula, you mentioned the Right to Information Act, and I believe the CPA was heavily involved in that, and that took nearly 18 to 20 years before it came out.
Well, I don't think that process was public enough. I think we have to get back to the white paper model, because I was giving input, and it was almost impossible to get the input in. So I was publishing all my comments because the committee was not quite receptive.
So, Professor, now taking a look at this paper, it's coming in as a white paper. What make you?
Nobody calls it a white paper.
Yeah, okay,
I wish it was a white paper.
But my point is, how do we know that the people's aspirations, the media institutions' wishes, are embedded in this piece of paper? Because you say that you, in terms of the Right to Information Act, you have been submitting your proposals right throughout, and they were not receptive. So, what makes you think that the government would be receptive to the media institutions when it comes to this piece of paper as well? Because they have convincingly a majority in Parliament right now.
Well, you know, there are. I mean, I'm in this policy business, and we know what we can do, and we know the imperfections of the system. So I'll use another example. I mean, I can go back to the Right to Information, which I thought was done in a rather opaque manner. Because, you know, if you're lucky, if you were inside that committee, you were in, but those who were not, like me, were not in, and there were few public consultations and so on. Now, the Data Protection Act, which is again, if you really, I mean, it's kind of esoteric, but it covers everything. Like Right to Information, it has a very pervasive impact on everything in society, government organizations, private organizations, everybody, it covers. What we did, and I had to give credit to the minister at the time, the state minister, was that he got the process started in about January with a drafting committee, and I think by May or June, they put out something called a framework document, which had sections, subsections, and so on, which looked like an act, but they said, we are not allowed to call it a bill. It's a framework document, and they had substantive responses. They held public consultations. A lot of people from the industry, the computer and BPO industry, came and made representations. And I could see, because I was tracking it, I was not on the committee, I could see that it was being changed. And it kept being changed. Now we are talking in 2019, and it was about to go for cabinet approval when the government changed. Now Mr. Ali Sabri, the subsequent minister, took that document. I don't know what he did to it, but he gazetted it. And then even after he gazetted it, he made some substantive changes, right? So that was a process that was somewhat closer to a white paper model than anything I have seen in recent times. We have to go back to the white paper model, particularly for laws like this.
But it is a process rather than just parachuting in a document which then we waste a lot of time trying to figure out what in the world this is all about.
So I can tell you that the minister who commissioned our report, his intention was to have public consultation.
Who was the minister in charge?
Mr. Samaria, Mangala Samaria. So that's why these things were translated and so on and so forth. They were getting ready for a public consultation. Now I was not part of the ministry. I was outside. I was not involved in the mechanics of it. My job was to do it and give it, and I gave it. But their intention was to have public consultations.
Rohan, the business community, you know, do you think they are serious about such regulations? Now, if you look at the chamber, the national chamber, you look at, I think there are at least a dozen chambers in Sri Lanka right now. Are they concerned about issues of this sort?
See, Shamir, when you're dealing with money, you always develop a strategy which is competitive, because at the end of the day, if you're not competitive, you cannot get a consumer to buy your brand. So, for whatever reasons, even though the environment was continuously putting shocks on business communities, you guys also are in business, you know, we some or other get our act together, and we survive. And we even thrive, to be very honest. There are companies who are doing really good.
Some companies.
Yeah. All right. I mean,
very subjective.
Yeah, but you're sharp. You know, you can survive even with a negative 7.8% GDP growth decline and a 3% again coming this year. Yet we are
Big companies
surviving.
can survive,
Yeah.
but not the small and
SMEs,
medium-scale
right?
enterprises.
So the point I'm just trying to get at is that, you know, the business community loses total confidence when you have these documents that come. You know, so they don't take government regulation seriously. I mean, end of the day, we say that we have the 25 best scientists. I saw something going up on viral media.
10.
Yeah, 10.
In Asia.
We say that we are the best brains. We can't even put a simple document out like this. I mean, end of the day, what is this economy? We are crashed. We are bankrupt. I mean, even if you take 1960 plan or if you take a Malaysian plan of 1950s, it will be much better than us. So my question is that why is it that a member of this discussion says, I have a plan that is much better than this? If this is what the government is saying that we are going to put together, why is it that they can't get a group of people, use the best practices of some other country, bring it in, have the consultations, do the changes that are required? If this document cannot be brought in, private sector loses confidence in this whole process.
Do you think there is dictatorship, authoritarianism in Sri Lanka at this moment of time?
See, sometimes you require that kind of leadership style to get a company which is in bad shape, like what Sri Lanka is in. But then, at least now that stabilization is coming, get the best brains into the table, you know, put something right even now. If continuously we have this kind of documents that are brought in, the answer to your question, Samir, is private sector loses total interest.
No, I'm not talking about
You
private
know?
sector, Rohit. I'm talking about the wishes of the president in power, because at the end of the day, he's responsible. He heads the cabinet. When such documents come into play, many might have the opinion that he's trying to safeguard himself for the future. Do you think the aspirations in terms of this bill is such?
Well, I don't know. All I know is that if we could have gone after the 6.4 billion from Express Pearl, you know, many people don't have to pay taxes. First quarter taxes, all that was gained was just 300 billion Sri Lankan rupees. If the 6.4 billion, none of us had to be taxed.
US dollars.
Yes. And how come there is not a single discussion on that? Who has done it? Where it has happened? I mean, you have people who come to cabinet, into parliament and say this is the account that somebody has paid, which nobody has found that account, and no action taken.
Actually, Rohanta, we've been trying to fit the Express Pearl issue into the Face the Nation schedule, but all this rubbishy drafts that keep coming up.
I've been displacing it.
Yes.
So you can just imagine, Niresh, can you see, you need direction right now to put all the best brains behind where you can get the best return. That's how we run business now.
No, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I mean, Express Pearl, you know, the fertilizer issue, not yet resolved, no. I mean, tea industry has crashed, 52 million kilograms of tea has declined. All the crops, rubber, cinnamon, everything has dropped by 40%. Even now we are not correcting it. No. Even as we speak today, you can talk to the farmers and ask, what is the fertilizer that has come? You know, when I told my dad, he's a just a tea planter. When I said, he said, why don't you talk about the tea industry? You know, 40% decline, 52 million kilograms of tea again lost. You know, and no discussion how to revive. And even now it's not been revived.
Which is
And we are talking about
the instability of the exchange rate. It's just crazy. You know?
And we are talking about this bill which has not been drafted properly. And a member of this panel says he has a better bill. What is the status of a country?
No, it's not sort of, I'm not saying it's mine, my personal thing. It's something that the ministry commissioned. It's in the ministry's official records.
Which is a better version.
But now we spoke of authoritarianism and also the best brains. And it is authoritarianism which brought us to this bankruptcy situation in the first place, where the fertilizer issue and many other issues were one-sided decisions which a lot of people warned about, and authoritarianism didn't listen. We ended up where we are now. So we do need the best brains moving forward.
And
but that
Niresh,
is not that's not authoritarianism.
And Niresh, my argument is that we are now going and talking to the nations of the world about debt restructuring.
You thought they are going to accept this kind of document and this way of running an organization or a country? What is the future you give a youngster?
But Bhavani, they have wrapped up the anti-terrorism bill way beforehand. No, they knew the repercussions would be bad. As a result of that, the situation changed. Don't you think?
But it's something Niresh just said, we should be having conversations about key issues. We should be having conversations about what happened, what led to the economic crisis, what's happened to accountability on those fronts. But the last few months, at least this year, we've been extremely kept busy by certain drafts that keep churning out from the government side. Now, it just begs the question, why are these things coming out at particular time periods?
That seems to be like a strategy as well.
It seems so. I mean, I'm not saying it seems so, but see, for a couple of months, we were very busy trying to understand, tackle, challenge the anti-terror law, the proposed bill. Now we are debating this. Then the question is what, and then of course on the side, but very important, are the particular risks that happen. The government at one point says they're not going to use the PTA, but then some people are arrested under the PTA. At one level you're thinking, who is calling the shots? Are they not talking to each other? That doesn't seem to be a communication even within the government. But really distracts from the topic at hand even today. Now we're talking about right to truth. When we talk about right to truth, when so many people last year came to the streets demanding for a system change, demanding for a change in governance, demanding for political accountability, we can't keep demanding for those because we are now fighting these. It's like
we are firefighting.
We are firefighting. And so then the whole question about the whole issue of fertilizer, the whole express pearl, all of these things where there is some, if really we have time to go into it, there are fundamental questions on those that can benefit the people. Sure. Instead, these insidious tactics are being used that have such consequences that we are then trying to kind of push back on this. Yeah?
This seems to be, Niresh, like a strategy, like a long-term strategy to be in power, to make sure that media is kept out of the real issues, and then trying to suppress them on the other side.
Plus, without having elections.
Without having elections, it seems like a major plan, isn't it, Manjula?
Definitely. That's why I mentioned earlier. Actually, that is the basic plan.
This probably will not even come into play.
Yeah.
This might be even thrown out of the window.
Timing game until having.
We hope. Keep us busy when they try to do something else.
Yeah.
It's not just the media, no. I mean, it's about. If you remember the anti-terror, there was one clause we discussed in this show about the prescription. That prescription could apply to any organization. Now, who would have issued prescription orders? The president. On what grounds? Reasonable grounds. So, one individual, I'm not saying just this president, one individual had such broad paths and they didn't go through any process other than possibly him or her saying, I don't like this institution, I'm going to prescribe it for 1 year. So what we are seeing now is something equally problematic, that it's an executive overreach in different ways. And what's the check? What's the due process? Where do people go to in terms of fighting this back? So it's not just media institution. This we're talking about media, but there is a tactic, and not just this government, successive governments that have used to shut down dissent and having a different opinion. Now people get activated when they think it's going to come and affect them, and they forget the larger consequences of all these things. Because as Rohantha also said, where is then the public confidence? Who is going to engage with a country, with a government that is so hell-bent on repression at different levels? And then the narrative that is created is he or she is a terrorist, is a fascist, is trying to destabilize. So a bill like this could it's entrenching those practices we've seen since last year as well. Those who dare to critique, challenge, to get to the streets are the troublemakers, are the traitors, are the terrorists. And those labeling will carry through because there's various tools being used to go after them. And this is just one tool in that playbook. I think that we need to understand.
Shamir, my humble recommendation to a media institution as powerful as you guys is pick up the issues of the country, discuss the issues of the country. And when there are these kinds of documents that come with, we know it's a deflection strategy, don't bring it to the media. Now, I would have loved to discuss about SME strategy today. Look at it, Shamir. Shamir, just look, Shamir, just look at it.
No, the thing is, Rohanta, we would love to do that, but if we don't, I'll tell you a classic example like the anti-terrorism bill. We voiced over and over again opposition. If not, this bill would have gone through. It was almost in the order paper as well. They scheduled it for the 25th of April. And because of the media opposition, others also, but media and civic
don't take all the, I mean, you guys don't want all the blame, don't take all the credit.
That effort actually that has been success. Because we also as an organization got an appointment with the minister to talk on anti-terrorist bill tomorrow. That means actually they are gradually, at least they are trying to listen others. That is the effort you all taken because of.
For example, on the anti-terrorism bill, we spent 4 consecutive weeks of this show on that. When we were trying to get away from it, Rohanta. We were trying to get away, but every week when we have a list of topics, and when we looked at it, this was the main one over and over again. We had the Minister of Justice one time on that, and at that point, the Express Pearl issue had also come up. So we badly wanted to ask him about that as well, but we just couldn't on one show.
I think, Rohanta, on that, I think it's so critical for media entities to highlight issues, and not just these kind of laws, but highlight a broad range of issues. The problem is that we're so busy fighting the more immediate that we are also stretched thin. But I guess one thing maybe to learn from even just the last couple of months is that this is going to keep coming up. Closer to election, there'll be more and more things coming up. And I think if anything we can learn from 2019 is pre-election, just think of what happened that led to this mindset that people said national security is the most important. That trend is starting to happen. Be it laws, be it arrests, that's happening. Who's the correct citizen? Who is following the law as opposed to those who are questioning, critiquing? That narrative is starting to take shape, and the question I think some of us have been putting out is who is also behind shaping those narratives and debates. And that's why we come back to regulation. Responsibility is so critical, but how it's done is also so important.
If I make one point, Shamir, is I would love to discuss SME. 73% of Sri Lanka's economy is SMEs. 83% of the exporters are SMEs. SMEs are wiped out in the country.
It's important. It's important to talk about that.
It's vital.
Yesterday,
this as well.
Niresh, yesterday I was talking to the chairman of a SME authority, and she's saying that the utility cost has increased by 300%. The interest have increased by again 300%. So yesterday, to pay the last month's salary bill, they had to take a loan. So, and she said she's kind of quite a large institution which can take that pressure.
Well, I have a question on that. Now we say this SME sector is not happy with how they are being taxed, or the utilities, or whatever it is. Tell me one authority who has raised this concern, having a press conference, talking about these problems and telling the government that this is not right, this should be looked at. Which authority is saying this?
I googled this.
None.
Shamir, I googled as soon as I heard this discussion yesterday. I googled. She has been doing this for the whole of last 3 months.
In the media?
In the media. And she's very vocal, very upbeat, and then only it just struck me, if you look at the tourism industry, SME industry, if you take Noor area district, almost 200 to 300 small timers are wiped out. Wiped out, and it struck me, guys, we don't fall into that category. So it's a forgotten, and they are not the people who are in all the papers. They don't have the muscle to go to the media. You see, they do this pocket meetings.
That is why it's important for the chamber to raise these issues, because the chamber has a better strength, better muscle.
That would be the discussion then,
Definitely.
Oh, absolutely.
No,
but at the same time, Rohanta, if this were to pass, you would not be able to say anything about SMEs because
if we are closed down.
we would be closed down because we are discussing SMEs.
Neeraj, we will continue to say.
Because if the government thinks that this is affecting the national economy, that's it.
They might lock up Rohan.
I don't know about locking up Rohan. They might take a license, Nilesh. Anyway, I want to close today's discussion, but I want to ask all 4 of you, with regard to the way forward, what must we do as a nation? What should be our priorities right now? So let's start off with Manjula.
Yeah, the first of all, actually, what Dr. Rohanta said, actually, that talking on SMEs, actually, that we need to concern on freedom of thoughts first. After that, we can talk anything, any topics. The way forward regarding that, what I mentioned earlier, that at least that Justice Minister is trying to listen to others, giving some meetings for organization and civil society activists and some institutions. That mean it is a result of that taken by many individuals and media institutions and civil leaders. Then regarding the process, actually, one thing they can do is actually that open a window to discuss among citizens. Then what Professor correctly mentioned, actually, at least we can identify this as a white paper. If so, they can come up with a framework. Then we will be able to provide more and more information as well as our ideas. Then only actually they can draft a law. That should be the way. But we can't see that such a process to be followed by the government at the moment. That is, it is taking a revenge like that. Actually, when having seen this document, that the word using and also the wording, then the way forward, actually, that my take is that actually they should be given more chances to citizens to obtain their ideas.
Thank you very much, Manjula Gajjanayaka, Executive Director of the Institute for Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies. Rhonda.
Shamir, we always look at Sri Lanka and we say Sri Lanka is bankrupt, but there are another 72 countries which are just like us, which a lot of people don't know, right? So that's what World Bank says. So I would just ask, who are these countries? How come they are rebuilding themselves? Take the best practices and put it on the table. I would say that's what is required, rather than, we know that this homegrown model has not worked. Why are we again going back to the homegrown model? We know it has not worked. And I don't understand why we keep, going back to this homegrown. From this discussion, I'm not an expert, but when I listen to the experts, it looks at this another homegrown model that has been brought. Why is it that we're going on this homegrown model when there are expected best practices in the world? Why are we not taking it on the table? And I'm just confused. How come we are such an intelligent nation, top 10 scientists of the world? Every day you have a conference. Every week you have a top conference staged in Sri Lanka, in all the hotels. I have never seen such intellectual capital in any of the other countries that I work in, Maldives or in Pakistan. Never. But we have all these conferences, so much of intellectual discourse. Why is it not been turned to practice? There's something wrong, no?
What is wrong, Ron?
The system is not absorbing the best talent, I suppose, which is another classic example like this. So outside the system, it's been discussed and, again we go back.
Prananda, now you were also part of the previous government heading a state institution. Even you were thrown out, no, Rohanatha?
So, if you don't agree to corruption, you know, you're thrown out. I'm proud of it right now.
Maybe at that time, you know, you sometimes ask yourself, you know, should you play the game? But then here, I mean, we work from multinational companies, Shamir. So, you know, for us, corruption is not a choice. So we said no. But today, when we go back, we are so happy that we said no.
Ron, you said there are 72 other countries in the world like Sri Lanka, but I don't think the situation that we saw, you know, how things panned out after the 2019 elections is something that any of us envisaged. Don't you agree with that?
Well, it happened in Pakistan, Shamir. It's a repeat.
It is happening right now in Pakistan.
Yeah. So, these are case studies of the world. You know, history repeats itself. And we would never have thought a Sri Lankan is going to revolt. Never. I mean, we see this over time. But then history repeated itself. And sometimes you can't believe, because we are in consumer marketing. We know how consumers will react if you don't put a proper product. But sometimes we never think that a housewife of Sri Lanka will ever be like a housewife of India. So outwardly driven, go to the streets and shout saying, I don't like your product.
Isn't that the system change that the people wanted? And do you think that system change is now being seen at grassroots or even in the country?
I mean, this document, which I had no knowledge of when I studied for the last 2 days to come here, does it reflect system change, Samir? When a team member says, one accepted is in the ministry also. What is the system change mean?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rohan Datskora, former chairman, EDB and tourism, attorney at law, Bhavani Fonseca.
So Shamir, when I get a call to join a program like yours, it raises questions because it's becoming quite regular to talk about a problematic law practice, and it speaks to the governance and democracy in this country, that every couple of weeks we have to raise concerns about something deeply problematic and goes to the heart of people's rights and democracy in this country. From the anti-terror to the rehabilitation to now a broadcasting. These, I would say, are just examples of how much more we need to do to ensure that we actually protect what we have and what we call as democracy. Now, 75 years after independence, there's so many things I think we just have to keep improving on. The lawmaking process is one of it, that a few elites or few key people decide what form and shape very important pieces of law is going to shape this country, and citizens are kept out of that. Last year, citizens came out to the streets in numbers, quite a remarkable sight, calling for change. That change, I would say, very clearly hasn't happened. But when we see that with all these things that keep getting thrown our way, that the government has to actually pause and rethink and then call for consultations. However problematic their process, something is working, that we are having some kind of impact. So that's important. So with this issue, what I'll say is that there's some positive things that we can learn from as citizens in terms of activism, in terms of critique, in terms of challenge. And one of the things we need to keep remembering is that the government is there, it's there to kind of, it's holding things in trust for the people. If they're not doing their job, it's our right to keep challenging and critiquing. And what the Supreme Court has very clearly said is never let the government assume it has the guardianship to control what is in our mind, in our thoughts, in our expression. So these kind of pieces of law is going to keep us very busy for the foreseeable future. I suspect after this there'll be another one and another one, and we'll be talking about that. What I think we need to do now is, while we challenge, keep pushing back, is also take on the other more important issues as well. And I think for all of us, while we firefight, it's to have the broader conversations. What does this country mean to us going to the future? Where are the youth? Many are leaving the country. How do you ensure that they have confidence to come back? How do we get the investors to come back? But also ensure this country is a place where we all can live in as citizens and in dignity. And this is something, another determination very recently, a Supreme Court determination spoke about dignity of the citizen. That I think we have lost because we're firefighting, we're pointing fingers, we're saying what is not done. So I think we need to take a step back and realize this is going to keep coming back to us, keeping us busy. But we need to also step above all of it to ensure that we demand for a better governance model.
So, Shamir, I think going from that, we need to have 2 episodes of Face the Nation each week. One to deal with the real issues, such as the SMEs and so on, and one for these piddly paper which is to prop up all this.
Basically, you're going to keep us very busy. That's what you're saying.
Right. Last but not all the least, Professor Rohan Samarjeeva, Chairperson of Learn Asia.
For a long time, I think I've been involved in preparing laws. So I sort of know how the mechanics of it work, which is you draft a concept note, you draft it in sort of technical terms, then you send it to the cabinet, and then it goes to legal draftsman and so on. I know that process. And I've also been involved in implementing laws. So I can remember I was looking at the telecommunications law and I was going through the sections and I said, has this been used, has this been used? It was about 7-8 years. And it was like there was a law that had public hearing provisions, public notice procedure. Nothing had been used. So I said, hey, okay, let's work our muscles. Let's have a public hearing. Let's have public notice proceeding. Let's actually implement this thing. So with that experience, I have been quite disturbed by the fact that when we have technical legislation that has very broad implications, we don't consult enough. So when I was doing it, I would prepare this sort of concept note, and we would have I didn't have the money or the time to make the translations and so on. We would put a newspaper notice saying this could be downloaded from such and such site, and here is the place where you can come and have a discussion with the consultants and the people who are managing the consultants. Even with trade agreements that I was involved in, I went to the professional associations and I had consultations. So I believe I don't do consultations for sort of altruistic purposes. I think you do consultations because you learn and you can make your document better, right? So I think that whole white paper model that we lost in the 1980s and the idea of proper interministerial coordination, we have actually things being smuggled through cabinet without the relevant ministries being informed and their comments being obtained. It's only the finance ministry that is never ignored, but other people tend to be ignored sometimes. So I think we need to get that system back, right? So that's very important. Get that system back, and in addition, let's have consultations. So we have sort of odd mechanisms, like we did not a white paper, but what we did with the data protection legislation in 2019. And then we have the sort of the situation with the anti-terrorism law. I've been having too many meetings with the Minister of Justice because I went and negotiated section by section the 21st Amendment, right? We took a large number of people with us to talk about the anti-terrorism law, and we were instrumental in getting it postponed. You know, it's like the elephant, right? You guys think you poked it in this side, we were poking it from another side, and the elephant moved. So we don't know what caused it to move, but all these people contributed. So I think we need to tell the government, particularly with these kinds of laws, let's do it broadly. And I think it's a good sign that anti-terrorism was pulled back. And then Corruption, same. We had a lot of consultations. And I would say for people who are looking for system change, for a long time we have understood that the existing Siabok law was ineffective. And there were people who were working there, people like Sarath Jayamana, who actually came up with language. I was also involved when I was in government, trying to contribute to the asset declaration component and so on. So those things, I'm happy to see them. I don't think anything is perfect. Laws are not perfect, but I think it's a major move forward to get that law instead of the rubbishy piece of legislation that we now have, right? So I think we should appreciate the good parts as well. So that's, in my view, if you're looking for system change which involves anti-corruption, I think it's a very important thing that we've got that thing done. It has gone through some form of consultation. The Supreme Court has spoken. Some amendments will be made, and it'll come. If you have a different perception of system change, I think there are more laws that will have to come in the next few months. There is no alternative but for more laws to come, because quite a lot of our laws are bad. And I think whatever said and done, I mean, I disagree with this particular legislation, but on the other hand, the agricultural scientists who wanted a simple meeting with the president to present the views on the oil palm ban were not given a meeting. They were completely blocked out, saying, this we have done, we are not willing to discuss, there's no point in talking about it, right? And here people like us, we were trying to tell the government this is not how this matter should be dealt with. So compared to 2021, I see a lot of positives in 2023, right? I don't see some kind of vast conspiracy. I see maybe ineptitude, incompetence, and various other factors. But I see a different attitude, and I appreciate that, even though it has ruined my life. Because, I mean, I keep studying these damn things and writing and so on and so forth, which is not something I appreciate. And again, I mean, there are things like in your case, the Parata execution, the Chapter 11 bankruptcy provisions. We tried to put this on the agenda. I've organized, we organized 132 webinars with key players, and at least half of them I must have personally organized. And, these were things that we brought up. What are the things that we need for the SME sector? But we can't get those particular ministers to act. This guy, Minister of Justice, is acting on whatever he's given, and he's churning them out. In some cases, he has got documents he can work with. In this case, I think he's trying to develop something de novo, which is unfortunate.
Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarjee. A very quick question for you. Don't you think incompetence is more dangerous than conspiracy? I actually never talk about conspiracies. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't know conspiracies. I don't ascribe motives. It's something I learned. I never do. So I just say, when you see a document which doesn't have definitions, but then, I would tell you, this is not limited to this. Do you know that our legal draftsman department came up with a constitutional amendment where the membership of a commission was 3 and the quorum was 3? That's our legal draftsman's department. Membership is 3, quorum is 3, and generally all people occupy those positions. Can you explain that to me? Is that nothing but incompetence? You know how I define it, Professor? Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarjee, Chairperson of Learn Asia, Attorney at Law, Bhavani Fonseca, Senior Researcher, Center for Policy Alternatives, Dr. Rohan Tatukoral, former Chairman, EDB and Tourism, Manjula Gajanayaka, Executive Director, Institute for Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies. Thank you very much, Niresh, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. Bad laws are the worst sort of tyranny. Take care and good night.